brainstorm.
Today's episode is sponsored by the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Since 1930, FBOP has been dedicated to professionalizing prison service, providing relatively humane care and strict oversight over more than 15,000 federal inmates. FBOP, looking after the population on the inside so you can feel safe on the outside. All right, episode 7. I consider this lucky episode 7 because I get to listen to the crime that you will be speaking about, Dr. Troyer. Welcome to episode 7.
Thank you very much for having me. It's kind of a gray, gloomy day over here at KMA East Studios. How about on the west side?
Yeah, definitely gray, not a typical sunny day. Maybe, sets the tone and the mood for the crime that you're going to present.
Perfect. Before we get to my crime, let's find out some of the fun places are that people listen to our podcast from last week.
A great group this week. So last week's episode was listened to by some of our good friends in Brazil, Indiana. Do you see what I did? I said Brazil.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then it's Indiana.
I got pretty excited. I'm not going to lie. Okay.
We don't have to break out our Portuguese because Brazil, Indiana is in the county seat of Clay County, which is part of the greater Terre Haute metropolitan area.
Welcome to our friends from Indiana. A lot of Troyers in Indiana, I think.
Really?
Maybe Indiana, Ohio. Yeah. Some of my people.
Have you been to the cemeteries there, or how are you documenting this?
Would love to. The cemeteries I really want to go to are in St. Louis and Lincoln, Nebraska.
I think you mentioned that.
And then maybe also a couple in England, and then one in Switzerland, one in Denmark. So that's my bucket list.
Yeah, cemetery bucket list. All right, well, that's Brazil, Indiana. Let's also say hello to our friends in Newington, Connecticut. Newington.
Is it just me, or are we getting a lot of play in Connecticut lately?
Yeah, I don't like to jinx anything, but we are building an audience in I'm not going to say the Nutmeg State, I'll say the Constitution State.
Yeah.
Newington is 8 miles south of downtown Hartford.
Okay.
If you want to geographically position it.
I did. I like to do that. We had some cousins in West Hartford, and they all went to the Loomis Chaffee School.
Is that near Newington?
It's in Hartford. West Hartford? I don't know.
Okay, so within 8 miles. All right, so then lastly, let's say hello to our friends in Blue Springs, Missouri. Hey, we were talking about St. Louis. This is Blue Springs, Missouri, which actually is 19 miles east of Kansas City.
Cool.
It's the 10th largest city in the state of Missouri.
Are you kidding me?
No, 10th largest city in the state of Missouri is Blue Springs, Missouri.
Fantastic. As I've said before, I think it's Missouri. The people there like to say Missouri.
Yes.
It's the show me state, and pretty exciting. Okay, welcome to our crew from Connecticut, Missouri, and Indiana.
Great group.
All domestic spots, so that's great, but we also have listeners around the world.
We do, and we are very happy that they continue to tune in, and we'll get to your town if you just keep listening. But Dr. Troyer, so episode 7, this is your turn. Very curious. You did leave us with a little bit of a tease last time, but I wasn't able to make much progress on where we're going. So
good. That's perfect. Okay. The idea for today's episode came from one of our sponsors.
Wow.
Terry from Terry's Turpentine.
Yes.
Sent me a text last week. I guess I said something on a recent show about Lebanon, Pennsylvania. He sent me a text. He said, hey, what about Lebanon, Ohio? We got a good criminal that came out of there.
Is that where the train wreck was? Wasn't there like a train derailment? I don't know if that was there, but that's not the crime.
I don't think that was Lebanon. That's on the tip of my tongue. I know Mayor Pete from Indiana was there.
Oh, right.
At that train wreck for a while. We're going to run with Terry's tip. Thanks, Terry. And thanks also for being one of the show's very first sponsors.
So appreciative. What a great sponsor. Very loyal.
He said in the same text, Terry and Susan, his wife Susan, are now grandparents.
Wow.
So congratulations.
Time flies. Okay.
Baby girl named Brianna.
Beautiful.
Welcome, Brianna. Okay. Now, I sort of bragged, I realize in hindsight, a couple episodes ago, I said, oh boy, this horrible crime. I remember reading about it as a 10-year-old, and I sounded like Mr. like on top of the news. Today's episode is the exact opposite of that.
Oh, interesting.
This is a story which happened when I was all grown up. I should know all about this, but for reasons which will become obvious, it kind of got lost in the shuffle.
Okay. Wow, this is crazy.
Today's crime happened in 2001.
Okay.
And it happened specifically 1 week after the 9/11 terror attacks.
Oh, okay. Why it may have slipped through. Okay.
Yeah. Today we're talking about the letters containing anthrax spores, which were mailed in September and October of that year to 2 U.S. senators and ABC, NBC, the New York Post, and the National Enquirer.
But no, this did become big. Like, I remember the anthrax being mailed in. Like, I don't remember what happened with it. So maybe I should have followed up.
That's what my point is like, I feel like half the time when letters have powder in them, it's a hoax.
It's like salt. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I couldn't even remember if that was a hoax.
Yeah, maybe I felt like this was happening a lot. Like, another letter arrived and who knows, but I never really followed up on any of these
Okay,
stories.
Well, that's what we're going to take care of business today.
Okay, anthrax specifically though.
Yes. Okay. When all was said and done, 22 people were infected by the powder in these letters. Of those 22, 5 died and 17 recovered, but some of those 17 have lasting health effects.
Wow.
So we're going to learn a little bit about this bacteria today. We're going to learn a little bit about the mastermind. We're going to get into it.
And was all of the damage done by one individual who sent the anthrax to these various people, or were there multiple people sending anthrax?
Can't tell you yet.
Wow. Okay. That's a tease in of itself. Great.
Okay. So the first letters get sent on exactly 1 week later, September 18th, 2001. They get sent from Princeton, New Jersey.
Okay.
And the text of the letters is very short. There's like at least 5 letters that we know of, and they all say some version of the same thing. One of them says, "This is next. Take penicillin now. Death to America. Death to Israel. Allah is great."
Whoa.
Another one says, "You cannot stop us. We have this anthrax. You die now. Are you afraid?"
Wow. Okay. Scary.
Inside the envelopes was powder containing the spores of the deadly bacteria Bacillus anthracis, and that is what causes the infection known as anthrax.
And may I ask a quick question?
Please.
How would one obtain this Bacillus anthrax? Like, you don't just go into CVS.
Interesting. It is a naturally occurring bacteria in our world.
Like, you're going to go hunt for it?
CVS. Like, have you been to a drugstore lately? Like, nothing's on the shelf. Everything's locked up. Nothing's on the shelf. It's like, what are we doing here? I don't.
Right. It's not like I'm trying to buy anthrax. Actually, I am. So is that behind that glass? Can I get the Mucinex XD, and then I'm going to get some of that Bacillus anthracis right up at the top?
This bacteria, going all the way back to ancient times, humans have been aware of it. It's common in people who work with animals or animal products. For a while, it was known as the wool sorters disease, that the people who processed wool would get anthrax occasionally.
Oh, wow.
But it's still rare. Globally, each year, about 2,000 reported cases of human anthrax.
Okay, so not a lot.
Not a lot. And mortality rates, depending on which of the 3 modes of infection you get. If you just touch the spores with your skin, you get the cutaneous version. And the mortality for that, if you don't get prompt treatment, is about 23%.
That feels more like a skin rash, like annoying.
Sure.
You're not gonna die.
Yeah, bad skin rash.
Bad skin.
If you have the bad luck of somehow eating spores, okay, you get the intestinal form, and mortality for that can be up around 75%.
I don't like those odds. Yeah, that's not good.
But that's not even the worst. The worst is inhalation anthrax. You breathe it into your lungs. Mortality there is, if you don't get prompt treatment, we're talking above 80%.
Okay.
One big problem with anthrax, and it's sort of similar to the disease that was in the news recently. Remember Gene Hackman's wife died of hantavirus?
Yeah, from the rat drop or some sort of like rat droppings.
Yeah, it's in rodent droppings. With both hantavirus and anthrax, one of the problems with them is the early symptoms sort of mimic flu, bad flu or cold. And so people a lot of times just sort of think that's what's going on, and they don't rush and get treatment. And so that's part of the problem, because the reality is, at least with anthrax, I don't know about hantavirus, but with anthrax, it actually responds very well to antibiotics. antibiotics.
But how would one know that you're coming in contact with something even like unless you get it in the mail and are like, "Whoa, what's this weird powder? Oh, I hope it's not." Well, how
Yeah.
else would you ever know you've come in contact with?
You wouldn't. And so then the next problem is it is rare enough that even if you go to the doctor or a hospital, they have to be kind of sharp and on their stuff and go through a long checklist to say, oh, you know what? We should also test for this.
Right.
Because they probably assume the same thing. Like, yeah, you got a bad cold.
Right. But do they learn how to manufacture this in a lab? Like, are people like, is this something that is produced?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So there's synthetic versions of this.
We're going to get in. Well, no, they're not synthetic, but they collect it in the wild and then they culture it. And, it is one of the so-called bioweapons that countries study and store. In America, we say, that we're studying it and storing it and analyzing it purely from a defensive posture.
Right.
But, that's the reality.
But someone in the military would know about, if you're a scientist in the military, you're working with anthrax.
Exactly. So the place, I think I mentioned in the tease that some of the action would happen in my home state of Maryland. The place that the military studies this stuff is in Frederick, Maryland, at a place called Fort Detrick.
Okay.
And it is the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute for Infectious Diseases. The acronym is USAMRID.
Okay, that seems like an acronym that's not saving you a lot of time. But okay, well, that's fair enough.
Okay, you'll get used to it. I'm going to say it a few times. USAMRID. Okay, now, because it happened right after 9/11 and because, it's a death to Israel and all that stuff, the initial thought was, okay, terrorists, foreign terrorists, maybe like Al-Qaeda, maybe Iraq. And if you remember, you were alive during this time, the George W. Bush administration was really gung-ho to go after Iraq. They wanted to have a war with Iraq.
Yes.
And they were very intent on finding weapons of mass destruction. So, the anthrax was initially studied from that angle. Like, it's probably Iraq. In fact, when, what's his name? Colin Powell, the Secretary of State, gave his big famous speech.
He held up that, yeah.
Yeah, what were you going to say?
No, he held up like a little test tube, glass vial of anthrax. Like,
See, I didn't
showing off
that
he can handle it. Yeah. I mean, the only thing I would say, though, is like these letters that you described, it almost seems so obvious, like the statements, like it almost seems like it's written to be like, hey, you know what I mean? Like, would the people
you should have been an investigator. You could have saved the FBI literally.
Are you supposed to look under the mess, like the obvious, like, hey, it says it's from him. It must be. What?
Yeah, you got to go a little deeper.
Yeah.
Okay, so the hunt for the bad guys was led by the FBI, and the FBI at that time was directed by Robert Mueller. Okay, who later became famous in the Russia investigation.
Yes.
One of the very first steps that they took in this investigation is they got samples from these 5 letters of the powder, and they sent it out to scientists around the country, as well as the ones at that place I mentioned in Fort Detrick. And they said, tell us everything you can figure out based on these little samples. Okay, and one of the key questions is so it's anthrax spores. Do they appear to have been, quote unquote, weaponized? Has there been some compound added or something that's going to make them like extra useful as a weapon?
So that would be sort of a signature of where it came from.
Yes, they said if they can find that. And one early analysis says, yeah, it does look like, we think we saw some silicon in there. Maybe they added, or silica. That's a compound. They said it looks like maybe that was added and to coat the spores, and that would make it like more stable or deliverable or something. And so definitely the Bush administration was like, aha, it's been weaponized. That bolsters our case that Iraq had something to do with this.
And I'm guessing before they went down this sort of scientific path of figuring out the origin of the anthrax, they checked to see if the person who sent it had included a return address, like on the envelope. Only because that'd be like a classic mistake later of like, oh my God, I cannot believe, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
in the movie, that'd be funny. Yeah.
Yeah, overthinking it. There was a return address, at least on one letter, it said 4th grade, Greendale Elementary.
Ooh, what is that?
I don't know. So they just went to Greendale and they just arrested all the 4th graders just as a precaution.
Good news, no homework. Bad news, solitary.
Good news, your children are very talented in science. Bad news is they're all in federal
You'll
prison.
never see them again. Yeah, exactly.
I think the idea behind that one was like, that might have been one of the letters mailed to a senator, and they wanted to make it look like, yeah, this letter is nothing, to be worried about. Open it up. It's from an elementary school.
See, that's higher level thinking. So why would they not take that at face value, but they're taking the message inside at face value? You know what I mean? You can't have it both ways.
I think it was also that it happened right after 9/11. They were like,
Right.
okay, this feels coordinated.
Yeah, no, I remember thinking, I was like, uh-oh, it's continuing. Like we're getting attacked more.
Yeah, because now in hindsight, I can tell you, okay, it looks like there were 5 letters. At the time, we were like, okay, first of all, we don't know if planes are going to keep slamming into buildings. Right. We don't know if letters are going to keep arriving with anthrax. What's going on? Like,
yeah, super scary.
But it turned out that initial analysis about the anthrax being weaponized was faulty, was erroneous.
Okay.
And as more data came in and more scientists looked at it, they said, no, it's still plenty deadly. I mean, it's anthrax. It's the bacteria that causes anthrax, but it hasn't been weaponized. Okay. However, the scientists become extremely puzzled once they start to figure out there's different strains of that bacteria. And the particular strain of bacteria that appeared to have been used in the letters was something called the Ames strain.
Okay.
And that had been collected and identified and stored and studied for years in the U.S.
Oh, so they can pinpoint where it was studied?
So we'll get there, but it was not known to be something that other governments or terrorists or anything would have possession of, or, so that was one of the first, like, okay, hold on. This stuff came from within the country.
Wow. Okay. That's a pretty big discovery. I mean, if you think it's going to be a foreign adversary, and then you realize it's not.
Right. And so they go to one of the top experts at that place, US AMRID, and this is a guy who was the co-inventor of 2 of the vaccines for anthrax, a guy named Dr. Bruce Ivins, very smart guy. He had started out his career studying Legionnaire's disease and cholera, which, those are fun.
Yeah, well, airborne, waterborne, he's definitely covering, all the surfaces.
But then in 1979, there was an accident that happened at a military site in the Soviet Union in which anthrax spores leaked and more than 100 people died.
Oh my God.
And that's bad enough as it is. But that really freaked out the U.S. military because they were like, okay, so the Soviets are definitely studying this stuff, and we don't know that they're studying it purely from a defensive posture. So we redirected a lot of scientific resources toward okay, we got to get up to speed on anthrax. So this expert who used to study Legionnaire's disease and cholera, he switches over to anthrax. Now, this dude is usually just a scientist doing his science stuff, lab coats, beakers,
goggles. Yeah, no, I love that. The apparatus is fun. Yeah, that's good stuff.
But in the run-up to the first Gulf War, when there were worries that anthrax might be used against the U.S., when was that? When was the first Gulf War? 1991?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Schwarzkopf and the Scud missiles.
People were worried back then, oh, geez, what if Iraq has anthrax? So that guy, Dr. Bruce Ivins, would always get called over to the White House or to the Pentagon or whatever. Hey, explain anthrax to us. Tell us what's the state of our vaccine development. And they ended up giving all those soldiers vaccines for anthrax, even though it turned out there was no need. That was not part of the equation. Now in 2001, 10 years later, same thing happens. The guy's like, oh, dude, here we go again. He's getting pulled into this scientist is getting pulled into all these classified briefings. And okay, but anyway, so he explains that by the end of 2001, early 2002, so a few months after the letters go out, he and other scientists and the FBI have come to a couple of basic conclusions. One is, it didn't come from Iraq. It came from America. Although they still haven't told us. They still haven't told the general public that. Okay. We're still, thinking maybe Iraq or Al-Qaeda. But then leaks start to appear in the press it sounds like the FBI is starting to interview domestic scientists. And in particular, in January 2002, the FBI sends out a mailing to all members of the American Society for Microbiology. I don't know if that's one that you belong to.
My membership lab?
Yeah, pay your dues, dude. The email says, it is very likely that one or more of you know this individual. Speaking of, whoever sent the anthrax. A review of the information to date leads us to believe that a single person is most likely responsible. The person is experienced working in a laboratory. Based on his or her selection of the Ames strain, one would expect this individual has or had legitimate access to this bacteria. This person has technical knowledge and or expertise to produce a highly refined and deadly product. This person exhibited a clear, rational thought process and appears to be very organized in the production and mailing of these letters. The person might be described as standoffish and likely prefers to work in isolation as opposed to a group or team setting.
Okay, but it seems like that's a very robust profile. And my guess is that if they were to look at a list of every scientist that has access to, that's probably like 10 people. Like, can't they just go find, like, this isn't a big population, right? That they're looking for?
Yeah. It's funny. You can tell that like both there's some science in that thing that they just emailed out, but then there's also this sort of FBI profiling thing. Like, oh, this person's probably standoffish, you know, like as I was reading it, I was like, okay, it feels like they copied and pasted some of the Unabomber stuff, you know, like when they were looking for the Unabomber.
Yeah. It's like the handwriting analysis. You have a good sense of humor and you like to have a good time.
But you make a good point. There's not a million people who would have the expertise to do this. Okay, so one of the poor bastards who gets caught in the crossfire of the investigation is a virologist named Dr. Stephen Hatfill. He had worked at Fort Detrick from 97 to 1999, and he was an expert on Ebola, among other diseases. He was suspected in part because during a search, apparently FBI bloodhounds alerted on Dr. Hatfill. You know, they thought they smelled something related to,
Right. Poor guy.
Okay, and then the more the FBI dug into his background, they found some serious inconsistencies in his credentials. I think he said he had a PhD. He didn't have a PhD. He had studied for years in South Africa. There was some confusion about who exactly he was working for there. So they're looking hard at him. And then there's a scientist outside the government who named Barbara Hatch Rosenberg, who starts writing blog posts about the case.
Oh.
And she's saying essentially, FBI, hurry up. Like, this shouldn't be that complicated. At first, she doesn't identify the person, but she said there's a very obvious candidate, and she kind of describes him generally. You know, she's talking about this same dude, Hatfill. And then her blog posts get noticed by a columnist at the New York Times named Nicholas Kristof.
Oh, yes.
And he starts writing columns basically about this guy, saying, like, what are we waiting for here? If he's not the guy, there's something fishy about him. So, like, you know, trying to get some pressure on the FBI to at least give us an update on what's going on.
But does the FBI talk to the military? You said that the military brought that Ivans guy in twice to deal with this anthrax stuff. It's like he's clearly got all the knowledge about the anthrax. They're not even looking at him?
Maybe they are at that point. I don't know. But they for some reason, they happen on Hatfill first.
Okay.
But anyway, the Hatfill thing all completely turns out to be bull. I mean, Hatfill, for one thing, as I said, he's a virologist. He studies viruses.
Yeah, Ebola.
Yeah, not bacteria. And then another thing is that bloodhound dogs, that stuff turned out to be just not reliable at all in the context of anthrax. And then as like resume puffing, I mean, who among us has not?
We got the dates wrong. I thought I left in April, not in December. What are you going to say? In a few months.
I knew I had some kind of degree. I was sure it was a PhD. It was actually a 2-year deal from the community college. So they had spent years and tens of millions of dollars trying to nail Hatfill. And then in the end...
Oh, so this is going on for years. They can't find the guy.
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
They had already spent millions of dollars investigating him. And then they had to pay him. The Department of Justice settled for $5.8 million.
Oh my God.
They had ruined his life.
Jeez. Unbelievable. And so the letters stopped coming? After
the letter stopped coming.
Got it. Okay.
Stopped coming.
Yeah.
Okay. By the summer of 2008, nearly
7 years later. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm thinking, do we need to go back to our sponsor?
Yeah. Let's hear from our sponsor. This is crazy that they can't find the guy. This is the United States government, military, FBI. It's 7 years and they can't find out who mailed the letters.
I know. And this is, I don't know if Lizzie arranged this or not, but perfect sponsor, FBOP. Are you kidding me? Federal Bureau of Prisons.
Unbelievable.
Like maybe it's going to turn out that the guy I tell you about or the girl I tell you about is currently in a federal prison.
That would be insane. All right, let's hear from our sponsor. We'll get back to it on the other side.
Okay.
For over 90 years, the dedicated team members at the Federal Bureau of Prisons have been trained to protect society and change lives. Looking for a fulfilling or semi-stable career where your skills will be valued and rewarded? Consider an application to FBOP. With more than 120 prisons of various security levels located throughout the country, FBOP has openings for nurses, correctional officers, dentists, cooks, and social workers. Plus, all full-time employees receive a laminated ID, excellent federal benefits, opportunities for career progression, and early law enforcement retirement. Want to learn why more than 35,000 people have joined the Federal Bureau of Prisons team? Hear directly from FBOP's employees by visiting careers.bop.gov to find a recruiting event in your area. That's careers.bop.gov. FBOP, looking after the population on the inside so you can feel safe on the outside. So yeah, very fitting sponsor for this episode, although we have not caught anybody to put in prison in this crime so far.
Yeah, all we have put in prison so far is the fourth graders, but hopefully they will be exonerated and they'll get out. You could not pay me enough to work in a prison. I hate to work against the sponsor, but yeah, it's going to take more than a laminated ID to get your freaking sign up.
You get a badge, but yeah, I mean, you get great benefits. You get all the major holidays off, apparently.
Dental. You probably get dental.
Oh, for sure. Prison dental, but still. All right, so you're 7 years later.
7 years later, so it's 2008. Case is still unsolved, at least as far as we, the general public, know. But in fact, early in that year, the FBI is really closing in on the person. They feel confident this time. And the suspect is none other than the man you mentioned, the same expert they'd been consulting with from the beginning of the investigation, Dr. Bruce Ivins.
Well, I had a feeling when you were describing him in the detail in which he's interacting with the Anthrax earlier that he must come back later.
And this is where Lebanon, Ohio comes in. I'm going to give you a little thumbnail sketch of Mr. Ivins, born in Lebanon, Ohio, raised there. Dad was a pharmacist. His granddad was a pharmacist. They ran the local pharmacy, so it makes sense. He wound up, working with powders and stuff like that.
Yep.
Very bright, especially in science, but also extremely socially awkward. And one of those people who's socially awkward, not in just kind of a quiet wallflower way, but like really amped up, like really energetic and smart and gifted in certain things. Like he's gifted musically. He can also not only juggle, he can ride a unicycle, and he can juggle while he rides a unicycle.
Both useless, but why not combine them? So he's very talented, not just as a scientist. He could join the circus.
Yeah. And by all accounts, his mother was severely physically and emotionally abusive, not only to Bruce and his siblings, but also to their dad.
Oof.
Their dad would arrive at the pharmacy with new injuries every once in a while, and he would just tell, one of the people that worked there, he would just name the thing that his wife had hit him with, like skillet.
Oh my God.
Or dish or mug. Yeah.
Right. No, I get it. You're cleaning out the kitchen cabinet then.
Bruce attends the University of Cincinnati. Go Bearcats.
Go Bearcats, yep.
He gets his bachelor's degree, his master's, and finally his PhD, all from Cincinnati, and all of them in microbiology.
Wow.
And he really does get his PhD, unlike Hatfield.
Right. It wasn't like a typo. Like he actually got it. Okay.
Now, works as a professional scientist for 36 years, including 18 as a senior biodefense researcher.
Well, I wonder if you ever met Travis Kelce, because Travis Kelce played football at University of Cincinnati. Do you think I'm not saying they would hang out, but like if he were there, if they overlapped.
Wrong generation.
Okay, fair enough.
Wait, Travis Kelce played for the Bearcats?
He did indeed. Yes.
Wow. It turns out along the way, when he's not at work, Dr. Bruce Ivins had some pretty strange and sort of menacing obsessions.
Oh, boy.
When he was a young adult, he had asked a woman out on a date, maybe at Cincinnati, and she had said no. And she was a member of the Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority.
Okay.
This marked the beginning of a lifelong obsession / vendetta that he had regarding not just that sorority, but Greek life in general. At one point, he broke into a Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority and stole their secret ritual book, and then also the cipher device that allowed you to decode the secret ritual book.
He got away on a unicycle.
And then for years, if he would ever bump into somebody who had been a member of that, he would just immediately bust out all this secret knowledge and like creep them out. Like, how would you ever know any of that?
Oh, so he's an oddball.
He would write letters to the editors of newspapers under pseudonyms, and he would post online on both sides of the issue of whether Greek life was a good thing or a bad thing. There was a case in the news where a boy had died during hazing. It's in the news. So let me back up. He had worked alongside a scientist, this woman named Nancy Hegwood.
Okay.
And he found out in the course of their working together that she had belonged to that sorority. Oh. And it was just like game on. He was just obsessed. He just wanted to talk about it all the time. She was like, you know what, Bruce, it wasn't even that big a part of my life. It's not something I'm still really connected with. I don't, but he wound up writing a letter to the editor of a newspaper somewhere under her name.
Oh my God.
About how great Greek life was. And then he made a copy of that. And then he mailed it to the mother of the kid who had died in a hazing accident.
Oh my God.
And he was like, thought you should be aware of this. And then became like pen pals with the mom of that dead kid.
Wow.
And this poor woman, Dr. Hegwood, a whole series of really creepy things. Like she was on the verge of getting her PhD. Mm-hmm. And suddenly her notebook that had all of her experiment results disappeared.
Ugh. And no one reported him ever? Because this seems like pretty egregious behavior, like in a work setting.
Yeah. He eventually does months later return the notebook. He pretends he had nothing to do with it, but she gets like an anonymous thing in the mail. Like if you want to find your notebook, it's at this PO box and she found, months later she gets it. She gets her PhD.
This guy's like single-handedly keeping the U.S. Post Office in business. He's constantly mailing things. Like this guy, they must really know him. Like at the post office. Oh, hey, Mr. Ivins?
This woman, Hegwood, was just the first in a series of female coworkers who, there was a pattern. He would become obsessed with the person. He would overshare about his own private life and his own mental health struggles with them. And then he would ultimately turn against them. And even then, when the Anthrax letters were mailed, he would try to implicate them. He would say to investigators, oh, have you thought of this woman, Martha Linscott? Like she used to work with this stuff, and I think we should look at her. Wow. He once mailed a poem to one of these women he had worked with, and he said it was a poem about how he sometimes felt like there were two people inside of him. One of them was a dream self, and here's the poem. I'm a little dream self, short and stout. I'm the other half of Bruce when he lets me out. When I get all steamed up, I don't pout. I push Bruce aside and I'm free to run about. Hickory dickory dock. Doc Bruce ran up the clock, but something happened in strange rhythm. His other self went up and exchanged places with him. So now please guess who is conversing with you? Hickory dickory dock. Bruce and this other guy sitting by some trees, exchanging personalities. It's like having two in one. Actually, it's rather fun.
That's his poem? Who did he mail this to?
One of the women he used to work with.
And why did she not immediately go to the police and to a psychiatrist?
One of them did. As soon as the FBI started saying it could be a domestic scientist, I don't remember if it was Linscott or Hegwood or this woman, Pat Fellows, but one of them was like, it's Bruce Ivins. Like, there's no question. So they do have that in their files early on. One of these women was like, it's 100% Bruce. Like because he also had sent an email to one of them on like September 15th. So like 4 days after the planes hit
so now he's using email?
Yeah.
He's a new mode of communication.
He's versatile. Yeah. So this is like September 15th. So the planes have hit the towers 4 days earlier. The Anthrax letters have not gone out yet, but he sends an email to one of these women like, it's so good you got your anthrax vaccine, because if it turns out that becomes part of this whole situation with the terrorists, you'll be ready. Like, it's going to be exciting. We're going to be on the front lines again. Like they're going to need us.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Just delusional. I mean, but I can't believe that he's still under the radar.
Well, now he's not.
No. I mean, but even at that point, like just given all of his coworkers and the poem, you'd think this guy needs to be locked up.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is that it just fastened on the wrong guy earlier. And there's a fantastic book about this whole thing. It's written by a guy who was a LA Times reporter at the time named David Willman. He won a Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of the Anthrax mailings. And in the book, he points out that Robert Mueller, for all of his advantages as an administrator, as the head of FBI, or all of his good attributes, one thing was that, or a couple things, he was like one of these we're going to solve this case by just drowning it in manpower. And so he was all about like, how many hundreds of agents do we have working? How many thousands of hours have we put into it? How many hundreds of interviews have we conducted this week? And he also really liked this initial suspect Hatfill. So it was a case where they were just so focused on the wrong guy that they kind of let Ivan slide for a while. But eventually they do start to close in on him. So what's the evidence against him? Like, if you're going to prove the case, okay, like, it may seem obvious to you, but you got to prove the case in court. So one of the strongest things is that they use the young emerging field that we talked about last season on our podcast, which is forensic forensic genetics.
Right.
They're able to say, not only is this the Ames strain of that bacteria, we can tell you like which batch of the Ames strain. Like, we can tell you which lab it seems to have originated from.
Right. That's what I was wondering.
Which container in which lab this probably came from. And it does turn out to be container RMR 1029. Ivans is in charge of that flask. Now, it is true that he loans out spores from that flask to other researchers around the country. So it's not a slam dunk, but it's part of the puzzle.
But they were able to trace the anthrax that was in the letters to a flask in his office?
They said it's the type that he grows there.
Okay.
That he's, been culturing there for years. It's that type of Ames. But the fact is, he's also been lending out some of it.
Understood. No, I know that part. But I'm saying, but it is like that they do believe the origin was from his lab.
Yes.
Okay.
The other thing that's highly suspicious.
And they've read the poem. Like, they know the lab issue and now they've read the poem? So can we put this to bed now?
So the second thing that's highly suspicious is, you work at a place like this, you use a key card to get in and out of everything. Just his behavior in the week before the letters were mailed, like he was working a lot of nights. He was working in the hot room where, the biocontainment room.
He's like Breaking Bad. He's like the guy from Breaking Bad.
Absolutely. And this thing where he's suddenly working a string of late nights, that's totally anomalous. That's not anything he's ever done in the past. And he has a horrible answer when they confront him. He's like, there's been a lot of tension at home between me and my wife, and work has sort of been like a refuge for me. And so they also found some earlier emails of his in which he said to somebody, I think he was talking maybe about I can't remember if it was regarding the first Gulf War or whether it was regarding the planes slamming into the World Trade Center, but he used those phrases, death to America, death to Israel, and these terrorists believe in that. So those are phrases that later obviously popped up in the letters.
So do they arrest him? Like, once they have all this stuff?
They are getting ready to.
Well, I mean, they've got the number on the flask. Like, they've got everything.
They're also so spooked because they just cut a $6 million check to Dr. Hatfill.
That's true. Yeah.
Like, we already, and the top supervisors are like, yeah, you guys were 100% convinced it was Hatfill, and then that wasn't true. Like,
but Hatfill didn't have that poem.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. So let me finish. So with the evidence, once the FBI started looking into his mental health, they were just so shocked. There were so many red flags along the way that they could not believe that this guy still had a job in the military at all, let alone in charge of bioweapons. He had once been hospitalized in a psych ward.
Oh my God.
He had been reported by a therapist because he was describing a fantasy that he had had about poisoning a coworker, but the therapist said it sounded less like a fantasy and more just like a plan. Like, it sounded like he was definitely going to do it.
Right.
There was other weird stuff that came up, not directly relevant, but, cross-dressing. He had a fetish for women who were blindfolded or bound up. Like, just the FBI was like, okay, even if this isn't the guy, he can't work one more day at this lab. And so that's one thing they do. Before they even arrest him, they're like, they let the top guy know at Fort Detrick, this guy can't have lab privileges anymore.
Has the guy ever had a performance review? Like, it seems like all his coworkers are like,
well, the other thing is it's such a niche expertise expertise.
Right.
And his supervisors and most of his co-workers, like if you weren't one of the co-workers who was unlucky enough to
have been in that sorority,
or to be a female who, whatever.
Yeah.
Like his supervisors were like, yeah, he's a weird dude, but he's incredibly good at his job. He's always in a good mood at the office. He's always helpful if somebody needs help with something. He's like the most chipper, kind of friendly, like
always willing to drop something off for you at the post office.
Yeah.
He's always going there.
Well, the mailbox he dropped it at in Princeton, New Jersey was literally like 100 feet away from a Kappa Gamma sorority. Yeah. So that was another bit of evidence.
I'm surprised instead of the 4th grade, like he didn't put Kappa Gamma as the return address.
Well, so then they were like, what? They even think they figured that one out. He and his wife were, poor wife, Diana, Diane,
kids?
I forget which.
Oh yeah, they had kids?
They have 2 adopted kids. She later told one of them, when the child said, why are we adopted? She said, oh, Bruce couldn't have children. But that's all she said.
Legally, he's not allowed to be around children. Not that he can't physically, biologically. He's just not allowed.
Anyway, he and his wife were big church people, pro-life people.
You've mentioned this in other pods. It's the church people. Sometimes you got to be weary of those people because it's a good front.
Yeah, he played keyboard at the church. He and his wife had given for years to a charity or an advocacy group called the American Family Association. It was a pro-life Christian organization. They, would give money every year. And then in 97, for whatever reason, they stopped for a couple of years. But then that organization was in the news because they were part of a legal case in Wisconsin, a state
I do know.
about.
Yeah, I do.
And this case involved a religious school, Greendale Baptist School, where a fourth grader had been. You're not familiar with that?
That one I'm not familiar with. But
yeah, you did not attend Greendale Baptist School.
Not that I remember, but
Greendale, Wisconsin. That case involved a 4th grader who had been disciplined, and then the religious school was, authorities came to investigate this. It became a battle over like corporal punishment or whatever. But the important part of it is 4th grader at the Greendale school. And that was that address. Then that fake address he later put on an envelope. It said 4th grade Greendale Elementary or something.
Interesting. Okay.
So that was another bit. Oh, the other piece of evidence is early in the investigation when they asked scientists from around the country, hey, not only can you analyze the stuff that was in the letters, but also, can you send us samples of the anthrax you work with in your lab? Right. So that we have samples from all around the U.S. And Bruce, who's supposedly the expert, keeps like sending in faulty samples. Like it's in the wrong container, or it's all clumped up, or it's a little bit, like the rain got to it, or, it's just like, what would you guess? We're going to move on to motive now. I'm almost done. What would you guess the guy's motive is?
Well, it's very hard to say because he sounds so mentally unstable. But my guess is he has some vendetta against the military. But that's only a guess. He's mad because he felt used, maybe? I don't know. He's clearly unstable.
That's a good point. He is one of those guys who's so fussy about his work that, a lot of his emails are he's upset at this supervisor or this person who didn't, do this right or store this right. Or so there might have been an element. The 2 big motives they saw is that, one, he wanted to be back at the center of action again. He had really enjoyed in the first Gulf War when he got to be in on all these classified briefings and stuff like that. And now the other thing though was that he was the co-inventor of 2 new generation vaccines for anthrax.
But that doesn't scale. If you're mailing anthrax to like 3 people and you're trying to sell a vaccine, it's like, there's only 3 customers.
Yeah, but imagine like how much you would pay if you're one of those.
Of course, that's a very good point. Okay, yeah. It's not volume. It's a price equation. Okay, go ahead.
Because one of the things that happened in the first Gulf War is all those soldiers got anthrax vaccine.
Right.
A lot of them complained afterwards that the vaccine itself had caused lasting health problems. So Bruce had helped develop new generation ones, but by then, some interest in anthrax vaccines had flagged a little bit. And so the idea here was like, okay, he's going to really boost the prospects for these vaccines that he co-invented. invent. And that part worked. I mean, he did not get to enjoy the spoils, but that part worked because after these mailings, the Bush administration was like, yeah, you name the number of how many billions you want to spend military on bioweapons, we will do it.
Did they think that is the case? Did he stand to benefit financially?
Yes, although if he had been in the private sector, he would have benefited a lot more financially.
Right.
Like if you do it for the government, I think you do get some extra money, but it's like, maybe an extra 100,000 per year or something. It's not
right. But he'd be at the center of the action.
He'd be at the center of the action.
Right. Okay, so they got to arrest this guy. What's coming next? Is it guns out in front of his house?
You got to get there. You got to arrest him. But he sees the writing on the wall, and so he says to hell with this, and he takes an overdose of something I didn't know you could overdose, Tylenol PM.
Wait a second. He has access to Anthrax. What signature move? What is he thinking? What is that saying about his life's work if he's taking over-the-counter headache medication?
Well, but you forget he doesn't have access to Anthrax anymore. He lost his lab privileges.
Really? I bet there's a little Anthrax laying around somewhere. Wow. Wait, so he took Tylenol and killed himself?
Tylenol PM. He took a whole bunch of it. Again, I didn't know you could. And he, so it doesn't immediately kill him. It destroys his liver.
No, it just gives him like a stomachache.
It destroys both his liver and his kidneys. He's put on life support, but both he and his family, or at least his family, I mean, they claim that he shook his head when they said, do you want to be on life support? But
exactly.
His wife by this point was like, no.
No, if you read between the lines of that poem, he's not one for life support.
You know what, Bruce? We're going to leave your dream self on life support. But
if you don't want us to, then stand up and tell us why you don't want it. That is insane. Because he was about to be arrested, he decided to kill himself.
Yes, he realized, like, they've got me. I'm about to go in.
Oh, so it was definitely like he was working alone. This was all him the whole time.
Well, so then that is the problem with him killing himself is then a week later, the FBI says, listen, now we're going to tell you, yes, he was the guy. He was working alone. We were about to arrest him. Here's all the evidence we had against him. There's some people who still to this day are like, yeah, well, that's awfully convenient. You already screwed it up the first time. Why should we believe this really was the guy? There were a lot of his coworkers at Fort Detrick who were like, yeah, he could not have done this by himself. The amount of anthrax he would have had to culture and keep separately or whatever, that would have been noticed. And then there was some other review that was done by an outside group that said this wouldn't be something you could do by yourself. There must have been other people involved. But
all of the anthrax that was mailed, it was all the same type. Like it all came from the same place, each of the envelopes.
Yeah, but like different, like the first batch, he mailed it out in 2 batches. And the first batch he mailed out, it looked kind of brownish and sort of clumped and granular. And it wasn't as like pure a form. It had a lot of dead spores in it. Whereas the one he mailed out a week later was like he had really refined it and it was closer to white and it was a finer powder. But they still came from that same flask that he had there.
So do you think it was just him? Or have you read enough where you think that there's validity to this?
Having read this book, which is called The Mirage Man by David Willman, I would say there's zero chance that it was not this guy or that he had any accomplices. Past behavior, whether it was the fake letters to the newspaper editor or the theft of this guy worked alone all the time. He had weird, devious schemes all through his life. Some of them, a lot of them involving the post office. Like this was the guy's MO. So I think he definitely did it and acted alone. One final word, just a note about the victims. We never like to leave out the victims. The first guy who actually died was a photojournalist at the National Enquirer down in Florida. 2 other people who died were postal workers who were working in a post office in DC called the Brentwood Postal Sorting Facility or something like that. And just the envelopes would go through machinery that kind of squeezed some of the spores into the air. And so these 2 men, Morris and Kursine, they died from working at that place. That post office in DC has been renamed from the Brentwood post office to the Morris Cursine post office.
That's nice. Yeah, that's good.
So they got that going.
They got that, yeah.
There was some woman who worked in a hospital in New York in a stock room, an Asian American woman. They still don't know exactly how she got it, but it was at the exact same time as everybody else. And the reality is that the letters were going through sorting machinery. And so it was even conceivable that you could have just gotten a letter that had been next to the, I don't know.
Jeez,
but yeah, 5 people died. And I will say this, having done all this, and then we'll wrap it up, but having done all this, looking into anthrax, it was such a scary thing in my mind, that word anthrax.
Yes, for sure.
But it really, like, compared to something like COVID, where people breathing it one to the other can get, like, that scares me much more than either anthrax or hantavirus, which is like you have to come into contact with the spores yourself. You can't just get it from other people.
Right. Well, and as you mentioned, like the numbers don't really equate to the fear, because the heightened fear and anxiety that people had over anthrax because of the severity of the illness that if you were exposed to it, but you're not going to be exposed to it. Like statistically, there's no reason to have that fear compared to COVID, where it's like, yikes, like you're going to get it everywhere.
Yeah. Another thing is they said that email got a big bump just as a medium, that people did start to, especially companies and
maybe Google's behind this.
Government. Yeah, good point. Maybe they were the accomplice. Government, companies, things like that really try to shift stuff over to email. Like you'll notice nowadays, if you want to comment like on a bill that's under consideration in Congress or in your state house, now it's generally, okay, submit your comment online.
Right.
Like they don't want a lot of letters coming in there. Nobody likes to open up the letter that's got powder in it. It's just not fun. It's
scary.
Yeah. But that is still a hoax you'll see regularly, like, letter with powder.
Well, every once in a while it pops out into the news.
Yeah. One last fun fact, anthrax, where does that name come from?
Yeah.
It comes from the ancient Greek word for coal.
Oh.
Okay. Like coal, like
anthracene, isn't that like
like anthracite?
Yeah, anthracite.
Because coal, because the skin lesions, if you get the cutaneous type of,
that's the rash. Yeah.
You get lesions that are round, black, hard, like coal.
Oh wow. Oh, scary.
Yeah, that's where that name comes from. Anthrax.
Interesting.
So I will say, if you feel like you've got a really bad flu, bad cold, something like that, but then you also have these like quarter-sized black lesions, then maybe get it checked out.
Yeah, that's a good thing. And now I'll be looking for those.
Yeah. Well, that's the other crazy thing. It's like, yeah, I guess I see the point of the vaccine, but like all it takes is some Cipro. As long as you diagnose it pretty quickly, it's like, yeah, taking an antibiotic.
Well, how quickly do those welts show up?
That was beyond the scope of my research.
Okay, yeah, very good. Doctor, great story, super interesting, and great because I remember just how scary the anthrax scare was. And I remember that those letters were arriving in Congress, and then I completely forgot what happened with that. So now we actually have the whole story. Incredible. And I can't believe it was just one guy and that I didn't know that.
And also, wait, one more thing. As long as we're talking about COVID, it reminded me a little bit of COVID in the sense that, like, remember there was the huge controversy, like, okay, well, did COVID originate in the wet market in Wuhan, or did it leak from the lab that is in that area? Right. Some people say, well, you know what, like, what are the chances? It's got to be the lab. There happens to be a lab in that area. Maybe the lab
leaked into the wet market.
Yeah, and good point.
There you go.
Or maybe somebody from the lab went over to the wet market, got some rare, muskrat meat or whatever the hell they eat, And my thing was like, well, no, dude, that's why they have the lab in that area, because there's all these weird viruses around there. But my point about even bringing it up is that you got to always be careful about the lab where you're studying this. Like, right. And especially if you have
somebody who has access to that lab.
Yeah, you got somebody who's like mentally unstable. It doesn't matter if he's good at his job and he's super smart.
Right, it's like Kaczynski, like they're smart guys, but they're crazy.
And he plays keyboard at the church. That's all great. But it's like, I know we're supposedly studying this stuff just for a defensive posture, but it's like...
Yeah, and I'm not one to stereotype or, judge a book by its cover, but when you see a unicyclist juggling, those guys always, to me, it's like, what's going on with that guy? Like, that's something I just don't know a lot of normal people that do that.
Okay. You know what? I might have to get edited out, because we probably have some listeners who juggle or unicycle or both.
And write creepy poetry. I mean, I just think that when you put it all together, it's like, whoa.
It was one of the worst poems just as poetry.
Yes. Yeah, because it's derivative. I mean, it's like, wait, stick to you're taking that from the classic? Okay.
Yeah, but it reminded me, you had a guy once who claimed to be a poet, and then you read the poem, and it was like, okay, that's horrible. terrible poetry.
Right. Yeah.
Latimer.
Yes, he was not a great poet, but he did receive some accolades, I think, for trying. It was one of those like participation awards. All right, Dr. We are going to call this a wrap. Fantastic episode, super interesting, more current, less violent, but sad with the 5 passings.
Yes.
But we will regroup next time for episode 8 on the Killer Means Awesome podcast, season 4, Killer Crime. Dr. Troyer, great episode. Thank you. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. All right. See you then.
Less than a teaspoonful of dry anthrax in an envelope shut down the United States Senate in the fall of 2001. This forced several hundred people to undergo emergency medical treatment and killed 2 postal workers just from an amount just about this quantity that was inside of an envelope.